right. Hi, guys. This is Doug. You are listening to a very special edition of What's the Hazard? It is Mother's Day weekend, and so I want to start by saying Happy Mother's Day to my mom, Charlene, my mother-in-law, Yvonne, and my wife, Tanya, who is a fantastic mother to our sons. So happy Mother's Day, everyone. Appreciate it, everything that you've done. It is Friday, May 12th, and I've got two very special guests in the studio today. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. It's been a long time coming. Mark Damon is here, and if you know safety, if you know fall protection at all, you know the name Mark Damon. He is you are safety and health royalty, man, and I mean that in all sincerity.
That's nice of you to say.
And I sincerely appreciate you coming up. And what's your name again? Jeff Springer. We'll call you the Prince of Fall Protection, if that's okay. I don't know if that's acceptable or not. You are the owner, president of Damon Inc., Damon Fall Protection.
Damon Inc.'s good enough.
Damon Inc., yeah, man. And you are like a big shot with PMG.
Oh, just a territory manager. Yeah, I've been there.
That's a big shot. Process marketing
group. Yeah.
But this fall protection thing, I can remember when you and I first met. We didn't really meet. I just heard you speak. I had the opportunity to come to a training that you were doing at one of the local conferences here 25 years ago, probably. I think maybe Mark Bandon. Remember Bandon?
Yep. He's a dear friend.
Our good friend Bandon. Yep. I think maybe he brought me to that training or something, perhaps, and heard you speak. And I was like, oh, shit, this guy knows some stuff. And so you've been doing it for, according to your website, like 40, 50 years. Is that even possible?
Yeah, 1976. I got my fall protection business.
Incredible. But you'd come out of school with like a marketing MBA or something.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So no safety background at all.
Well, neither had I, as I got into this as well. So we're going to spend the next hour talking about fall protection, fall prevention, the past, the future of this is an incredibly interesting system. I don't know, complex system, but it's been really fascinating. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity just to talk a little bit about how this all started, how you got into this business, and the evolution of this particular system.
Well, how I got into this is pretty odd because my first job with Rose Manufacturing had nothing to do with fall protection. Clarence Rose also invented the first child restraint for an automobile.
No shit.
And it was just a harness, a 5-point harness. And this was before car seats came out. And he developed this product that attached to a strap around the back floorboard, and it allowed the child to stand up. And so
in the seat.
So
awesome.
I got my master's degree in Kansas City, was hired by Marion Laboratories, which is a big pharmaceutical company who had just bought Rose Manufacturing Company. They had no idea what they bought. They just knew they suddenly had a fall protection company. He also had this one product for child auto safety restraint. They hired me to be the marketing manager for that product. Right after I took the job, I found out that Consumer Reports had given this a not recommended because this is when sled tests developed, which brought me to my ANSI blog that you talked about. That a guy named Colonel Stapp developed a sled test to generate G-forces for the jet pilots to see when they'd black out how many G-forces they'd get. Well, the automotive industry used that same sled to start crash testing automobiles and testing car seats.
Wow.
And child restraints. So the first time they ran the Rose Little Rider, it was called, down the sled, hit forward, worked like a charm. Then when it came back against the back seat pad, the mannequin rolled up over the top of the seat and landed head first on the floor. And they concluded that would kill a child. And that was my only product. Fortunately, the sales manager for fall protection quit. The president knocked on my door in my office and said, "Hey, Damon, you want that job?" I said, "Hell yes, I want that job."
Oh, my God.
Because that was the end of the Little Rider child auto safety. And I was now a fall protection guy.
No kidding. That is amazing. I've never heard that story before.
I don't think I've ever told
Either have I,
right?
yeah.
That is awesome.
So that was
Little Rider.
Yeah, Little Rider.
Oh, man.
That was.
And so, but I mean, those two, I mean, it's interesting that Rose was involved in both of those. That makes sense.
He's a genius. He
Restraints.
was a genius. Yeah. And he was just committed to safety. He made the first ladder shoe for the ladder manufacturers because they were too cheap. That's my position. They didn't really, I mean, that product, I'm against ladders totally. That's another thing I have a passion about doing.
Thank you.
Getting people to quit buying ladders.
Thank you.
He made the shoes to keep those extension ladders from sliding on the ground. He stamped the steel, put the pad on it, and then sold it to all the ladder manufacturers. And then, of course, they sourced it in China, bought the cheap stuff, but that goes with the program with them. But Clarence Rose invented a lot of the products: full body harness, first shock absorbing lanyard, first locking snap
I read
hook.
that. I think that may have even been on your website.
Yeah, he was an unbelievable guy. So I got a passion from listening to him talk, and that's what I've sold a lot of safety equipment in my lifetime. But fall protection is different than any other product. Kills more people. More people die due to falls, and there's a 13% of the people that die in a fall have the equipment on. They just don't know what they're doing with it. And that's why my position now is I've done it for 40 odd years. Fall protection doesn't work because we're relying on the person to put it on and use it properly. And
that's such an interest. I appreciate your candor. You're not at risk of being at this point in your career. You've earned the right, and you probably have always been this way, but to be honest and forthcoming. And I sincerely appreciate that. I am trying to be that guy now when I deal with my clients, because, you know, my good friend Pete Suska calls that good day controls. It requires so much on the employee, the user, to do everything right. And then maybe we get a good outcome if we do have a fall. And we're going to have falls. There is no doubt we are going to have falls. Employees make mistakes, things happen. So those things are going to occur. And only if we do all these things right is that going to work for us.
Well, sorry, Mark.
I
started asking that question in my trainings like a year ago. I'm like, you know, who was driving to work today and you got this weird feeling in your bones? I'm going to fall today. Nobody ever gets that feel, you know, and they laugh about it. And then I'm like, okay, let's just play it out. In the United States today, 1 million people fall all at the same time. What percentage of them will get hurt? Now, keep in mind, you have the equipment on and you feel warm and fuzzy, right? You're connected to something. I thought people would say none or 5% or 10%. You know what everybody's saying? 50, 70, 90. A guy last week said 100. And I'm like, well, that's probably a little high. And it goes back to training and inspections. And now it seems like using the right equipment, and then the employee using it correctly. They have this false sense of security that I'm connected, I'm good. And that's furthest from the truth.
Yes.
That's interesting. Wow.
And when I'm doing classes, I try to tell these safety people that, you know, you hired these people to be electricians. You hired them to be plumbers. You hired them to be manufacturing or maintenance people. Did you tell them in advance that you're going to potentially subject them to 1,800 pounds of force and be suspended in a harness, and that's part of your job description? I bet not. That's just, oh, by the way, you have to wear this.
Right.
And, you know, going back to 1,800 pounds in the force, all based on killing dogs in 1953 by Clarence Rose.
Is that where that came from?
Yeah.
I've wondered about that too.
He did a study at Ohio State where they dropped dogs. They had
Clarence Rose as a Buckeye.
No, I don't know. He wasn't a Buckeye, but
okay.
But I will say about the Buckeyes. Apparently, the only place where people are allowed to be tested for fall protection is in Ohio. So I guess they have no problem injuring their loyal citizens.
Tossing people off of the
yeah. So because Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is where we did suspension studies, Ohio State University where we dropped the dog. So it just goes on and on.
Wow.
So
I used to work for Wright-Patterson Air Force.
Is that right?
Base,
Well,
and went to Ohio State.
Wow. So
nobody tossed me off of anything that I'm aware of.
Well, they selected you. They said you're not gonna work. You're too tall.
Yeah.
But at Ohio State, they did the testing for Clarence Rose, and then at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in '86 is where they did suspension test, and that's the pivotal thing that converted people from belts to harnesses.
Oh man.
We knew belts were dangerous in 1930. We knew they were more dangerous when we did the dog test in 1953. I wasn't there. I'm not that old.
Understood.
But they realized the impact forces apply to your torso.
And so they're putting dogs in harnesses and tossing them.
No. They did dogs in body belts.
In belts.
And so we proved belts were dangerous back then. in
Right.
53.
Right.
Everybody ignored that study. So it wasn't until 86 when they did suspension tests and actually had airman third class, which I understand they don't exist anymore after they did those suspensions. But they hung guys in belts, and the longest they'd stay suspended was up to 2 minutes.
Before they just couldn't, they'd
They
tap
said
out. They couldn't take
they
it
tapped
anymore.
out. And then with a harness, it lasted 20 minutes where it got uncomfortable. So that's a 10 times saving or time
Wow.
increase you get with rescue. So it all pivoted not on impact forces, but the fact the guy could be suspended for a longer period of time before he could be rescued. So then the logic was, let's put him in harnesses, which was a big thing.
But I mean, the impact forces had to be incredibly different too, belt to harness.
Where it's applied, absolutely.
Breaking your back. I couldn't even imagine.
And so, well, you don't break your back. If you think about the concept of a belt, it actually works pretty well. Because if you put the D-ring in the center of the back, you're going to bend in a normal position for the body.
Okay.
Right? So there's not too much chance of spinal damage. It's just the compressive forces on your soft tissue organs. And it's all concentrated on a 2-inch wide belt around your waist. And I always used to say that a safety belt is a perfect definition of the word oxymoron.
Safety belt. I get it. That's so interesting. So how about, where did that deceleration device come into effect?
Clarence Rose. He invented the first shock
That ripstop shock absorber.
Yeah. He recognized the fact, and it's a common, if you think about it, the only way you can reduce force is to increase the stopping distance. So in the old days, we gave everybody a 6-foot rope, and I can still remember Miller Equipment Company. We had a shock absorber. So if we had it, then the competition said it wasn't any good. And there's an old safety guy for Miller Equipment named Joe Nelms. We used full filament nylon rope, but we sold shock absorbers. And he said, oh, we don't need shock absorbers because we have spun nylon rope, little strands that stretch more, which was all a lie. But he'd go there and pull on rope and see that's our shock absorber. So Clarence Rose developed the first shock absorber that actually worked. And it was he was making seat belts for Caterpillar tractor, had scrap seatbelt webbing, folded one in half one day and got a brainstorm to just stitch it back and forth. So when you fall, you pull against the stitching, increases the stopping distance and reduces the force. Every shock absorber since then has been on the same concept, whether it's a self-retracting lifeline or a shock absorbing lanyard, they all increase the arrest distance to reduce the force.
So what was the reason he did it? Just had it in his head to reduce the forces? And
oh yeah, because he had the dogs killed. He didn't do it on purpose, but they dropped the dogs in 52. The report came out in 53 saying the maximum force you should apply to a worker should never exceed 2,000 pounds. They didn't mince words in the 50s. They called that the threshold of serious injury or death. So he then did drop testing with manila rope, which back in the 50s was a predominant lanyard material because it was initiated back in 32 when they were building the Golden Gate Bridge with Joseph Strauss. They used manila rope lanyards. People were still using them in the 50s. And then they had nylon and polyester because of DuPont's work in World War II to find replacements for rubber with neoprene, and that led to all these synthetic ropes. But the forces were still above 2,000 pounds with a 6-foot free fall, which, by the way, the length of a 6-foot lanyard is clearly and totally based on what Joseph Strauss wanted in 1932. And every fall protection company still sells 6-foot lanyards because they've always done it that way. And unfortunately, that's the way this industry works. We do things because that's what we did before. But he realized back in the 50s that all these lanyards would put more than 2,000 pounds of force on the worker. And keep in mind, back then, we're talking about the force going around their waist.
Right, with a belt.
So he felt a sense of urgency to come up with something. This was the first one that worked.
Wow. That's remarkable. I can't believe you know all this stuff, man. I assumed you did.
It's getting old is what it's called.
Well, good for you. That's good too.
But I'm still alive.
Yeah, that is really amazing. So did you ever pitch you off of a roof or anything?
Oh yeah, I've jumped off towers, jumped off. Probably one of my favorites I did back when I got in the business, nobody was wearing harnesses. Everyone was wearing belts and 6-foot lanyards without shock absorbers and non-locking snap hooks. I mean, it was unbelievable when I got in this business. So we tried to pioneer the use of harnesses by going out and doing drops. And so I went down to Florida Power. They were transitioning from climbing utility poles to working out of bucket trucks. Well, they just took their lineman's belts with them and were using their lineman's belt in a bucket truck for fall protection and using a polypropylene rope, which is terrible rope for fall protection because there's no elasticity. It's kind of similar to a steel cable lanyard. So they're using a lineman's belt and polypropylene rope in a bucket truck. I went down there with my demo trailer, tied a lineman's belt around my steel weight and dropped it 6 feet, and the belt exploded. Because lineman's belts were never designed to be impact loaded. They were a restraint product or a positioning product, so they never had to go through dynamic testing. So I blew their belt in half. Then I took their lanyard and dropped it 6 feet with my weight, and the polypropylene rope broke in half.
Just snapped.
It's just snapped. And this was all their safety guys here, and they're looking at this stuff going, this doesn't look like it's working too well.
Did they look worried, or they were?
Oh, yeah. No,
or
they
it
were,
like blew their mind, like, oh crap, that.
so they were stunned. And so then they said, we want you to come back and do a demo. We're going to videotape this. So I came back, and we about a month later, and shipped down a sand dummy, because then what we're going to do after the end of my class was pull this sand dummy out of their bucket truck. So we hoisted that bucket truck or the sand dummy up in the bucket truck, and then we pulled it out, and the shock absorber opened up. And I said, boy, I made a big sale here. And I was kind of excited because the shock absorber opened up, and everybody's looking around nodding their head. And then one guy says, I don't think your shit really works. And of course I got defensive. I said, what do you want me to jump out of the bucket truck? And they all go, yeah. So I just said, I just stepped into that, did I? So I did. I jumped out of the bucket truck. But when I got up there, when you look up at a bucket truck, it doesn't seem that high.
No.
But when you're up there looking down,
yes.
it seems a lot higher.
Yeah.
So I made them keep lowering the boom. They said, you're going to hit the ground. And at that point, I said, I don't really care. So I jumped out of the bucket truck, and sure enough, my feet hit the ground. But the shock absorber had already deployed, so the force wasn't that much. And then I just tucked my legs up and acted like I didn't hit the ground, but it's pretty visible. And
what did it feel like?
Jumping with shock? Nothing. You don't feel a thing.
Don't feel it?
Don't feel it.
That deceleration is fairly smooth and mild.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. And so what you feel as soon as you stop, it's very painful.
That suspension trauma.
No, it's the
that
pressure on your thighs. 100% of the force is on your thighs. So think about your body weight. You're hanging by your thighs.
Yeah.
So that's where it's uncomfortable.
So any bruises?
No.
Nothing.
Just mental.
Just
right?
mental.
Just psychological
mental bruises. As soon as I said, what do you want me to do? Jump out of that bucket truck. That mentally bruised me because I said, you are a sucker.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But did you get the sale?
Yeah, I did get the sale. They switched everything to harnesses and lanyards. And plus I felt good on that. And that's one of the things that's rewarding about this business. You know, here we're in Omaha. I did work when I first started calling on Union Pacific Railroad. They were using belts and lanyards. And I remember the safety guy back then, his name was John Horney, wonderful guy. And I did a demo, and he said, okay, we're going to harnesses. And so they outfitted everybody in harnesses and shock absorbing lanyards. And I remember I was sitting home in Kansas City one Saturday, and I get a phone call. And it was John Horney. He said, hey, Mark, I'm just calling you to let you know you saved a guy's life today. And
shit.
That moved me.
I'll bet.
That moved me.
Wow.
So you talked about something else in that conversation, the snap hooks.
Yes.
The evolution of the whole system is really interesting.
Well,
and they used to just be like a coat hanger hook or something.
Well, we had one called, that's interesting. You knew about that one. We had a hook called the 7 hook. There's a company that makes forms. I shouldn't name them because I'll get sued, but they're out of Chicago, but they made forms, and they had this little slot. And the workers would climb this formwork, and there was no place to tie off. So when I was at Rose made a hook called a 7 hook, shaped like a 7 with no gate on it. But it would fit in this little dinky slot. But then we had a couple failures because it was just really small diameter metal. So I'm with the company for about 6 months, and they said, hey, we're going to have a recall. Damon, you have to go get all these hooks back. So I remember there's a company called Martin Eby out of Wichita that did a lot of form work. I said, hey, I need to come down and see. So I flew down to Wichita, and I said, we need to get all our hooks back. The guy said, no problem. What do you have to replace it? I said, nothing. He said, see ya. You come up
That's
with
not going to work for us.
So I went back to Rose and said, hey, they won't give them back. But the problem was the size of the form slot was too small. And I called this company. I said, hey, we'd like to work with you to make your slot bigger because we have a problem here. He goes, we don't have a problem. You do.
Right.
And to this day, it's the same slot size.
Is that right?
Yep. But we finally figured out, I think DBI did it first. They just took a regular snap hook and hammered out the nose to flatten it out.
Okay.
So it would fit inside that slot. And now some of these bigger hooks, these 18 rebars will fit through that.
Okay. And so what led to the two motion?
The double locking snap.
Wow.
All the hooks, and in fact, I've got a video on the Golden Gate Bridge. They were called single lock snap hooks, but there was no lock on the single lock snap hook. It was just a forged steel body, stamped steel gate, a spring and a rivet, and that's all there was to a hook. So you'd push the gate open, and then it would close. But if you pushed it against something accidentally, you'd come right out.
Almost like the keeper on a crane hook, almost.
Exactly like that.
Okay.
And so it would fail. I mean, and we had rollout. People would, if you're up there working and moving around, the gate would push against something, release. Snap hook could be released from your anchor point, and the worker wouldn't even know it.
Not even attached.
Not even attached, and he'd fall to his death.
Wow.
So Clarence Rose invented the first locking snap hook. He drilled a hole in the spine of the forging in the back, put a little thumb lock back there with a spring, and you'd push that up, and then the gate would open up. But if the thumb lock was down, it wouldn't open. Of course, it wasn't required. All right. So none of this stuff was required. He's inventing all this stuff. Shock absorbing lanyards, locking snap hooks, invented the first shock absorber in 57, not required until 96. Invented the first locking snap hook in 76, not required till 96. I mean, it was ridiculous. So people get locking snap hooks. They weren't required. First thing the worker would do is get a screwdriver and pop off the locking mechanism back because it was a little bit more difficult to operate.
Bit more. Yeah.
So until we had people like John Horney that said, I don't care if it's not required, we're doing it, until people started embracing the fact you have to protect your workers, nobody bought the stuff.
Yeah.
And when was that? That was in the 90s?
70s.
70s
and 80s.
Where Rose came up with these things.
No, he came up with them in the 50s.
In the 50s.
when John started saying we're going to do best
that
practice.
was the 80s, probably 81, no, maybe 79, 80. I don't remember much.
Earlier than
I don't even remember how old I am.
Yeah, but man.
You're asking me when John Horney made the decision. No, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
But Rose truly was a genius.
He was a genius. He was a pioneer committed to safety.
Wow.
And then that's the thing about fall protection. It gets in your blood. But then, you realize we're still relying on the same equipment. Basically, we changed the belt to a harness, a lanyard to a shock absorbing lanyard, then the shock absorbing lanyard to a self-retracting lifeline, but we're still doing it basically the same old way. Well,
because ultimately all of this depends on the user.
That's right. And that's why fall protection doesn't work.
Yeah.
13% of the people that fall to their death have their harness on and they're tied off.
I've investigated some of those.
Okay. And
they're tied off. No, I jumped too
jumped.
Early.
Yeah. And they're tied off. The most of them that fall to their death have the harness on and they're not tied off.
Yes. I've seen.
And all the time.
So they're miscalculating that fall distance then?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
You give them a 6-foot lanyard and they think they have a 6-foot lanyard, they're going to fall 6 feet.
6 feet. Of course.
They're going to go 18, 19 feet.
Well, you see it all. I mean, driving around Omaha right now, we could get in your truck and see. I've seen where you picked me up today. They were putting up an apartment complex there. A guy standing on a form 6 foot off the ground with a 6-foot lanyard, and I'm like,
why?
And I didn't get out of my truck at the time and say, hey man, let's do some math here. But that false sense of security, wearing the wrong equipment, now it's kind of evolved into many not using lanyards because they get that after all the drop tests we've done for decades. But now they're using the wrong self-retracting lifeline for the application they're doing.
Yes.
Exactly and it is so specific. I mean, the equipment specificity has to be right for the application. If you're using the wrong shit, it doesn't work. Or like, the anchoring, where you anchor. These guys, like the iron workers, anchoring at their feet and then thinking that's going to.
Which leads me to one of the things that's upsetting me is the new ANSI standard. Which you didn't ask, but I'll tell.
No, you're right. I'm interested.
So they require this new class 2, I think we're calling it. Is that it?
Yeah.
The new buzzword. That's the other thing I like about ANSI. They come up with new terminology and 7 years later change all the terminology
So we're all
to
confused.
self-perpetuate their interest and their
Yeah.
demand and their people's reliance on ANSI. Because what's the new buzzword? Oh, let's read the ANSI standard.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't make anything better. They just changed all the names.
But I got to pay $300 for a new answer.
There you do. Oh, that's just one chapter.
Okay.
Now I'm being facetious. It might only be $199.
Right, right.
Maybe overstating how much that costs, but it's well worth it. I mean, really, it's good reading. Isn't it? But if you look at the clearance guides on a class 2, I believe they're now up to 20.5 feet of clearance. Now you talk about an iron worker tying off at his feet on the I-beam. Well, what's the normal distance between floors of a new building?
It could be 10 or 12 feet, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
And they need 20 feet.
Mm-hmm.
What's
So
wrong with that picture?
that ain't happening.
No. But people
Wow.
are still using it right now.
Mm-hmm.
People are using the equipment and they don't have the clearance and everybody knows it.
Mm-hmm.
But at least they're tied off. They meet
Yeah.
the standard.
Right. Yeah, they meet the standard, which
Yeah.
is all they really care about, I think, to some degree, or at
Yeah.
least for the most part.
Well,
And which is important. I mean,
I'm not belittling meeting standards.
you have to be in compliance
Yep.
to some degree, whether that provides the level of safety that you believe it would. I think most people would just assume if I'm in compliance, then I'm safe. And those two things aren't necessarily the same.
That's exactly right.
Mhm.
And to OSHA's defense, and you mentioned Mark Bandon, who's just a dear friend of mine. OSHA can only deal with the tools they're given by the
Right.
manufacturers, right?
Right.
So they can write these standards, and that's one thing I kind of regret about when they rewrote the walking working surfaces standard. Is
Mhm.
OSHA's primary emphasis was passive fall protection, and they've gotten away from that to now allow all this fall protection equipment. The best
When you say passive fall protection, explain what you mean by
passive fall protection is the best fall protection they can provide.
that. Guardrails and things like that.
Guardrails, and I actually, I'm kind of an oddball. I consider safety nets passive,
Mhm.
and I consider them passive because the worker doesn't need to do anything to make it work.
Right. Right. As
Yeah.
long as they're installed properly, it's not dependent upon the worker.
That's exactly right. And we have to take the dependence, I believe, the dependence of our fall protection equipment away from the ultimate user. And that's the responsibility of the company to have passive fall protection. Because I've got 40 years of stats I can show them where fall protection, we've gone from a belt to a harness, a lanyard to a shock absorbing lanyard, a shock absorbing lanyard to a self-retracting lifeline. We're still killing people at the same rate. It's
Mhm.
not the product that's not working. It's the fact that people don't use it properly and don't tie off at all.
Mhm. So this is interesting that you say this, because we mentioned when we were just sitting out in the lobby talking with these guys I've been reading about, this new safety differently thing. And that is one of the cornerstones of this whole philosophy is we have to build capacity into these systems to fail safely. And that cannot be dependent upon the employees making good choices necessarily. Now, you could combine that. I'm envisioning maybe a scissor lift that has guardrail system around it, but also maybe an anchorage. So, because inevitably that employee is going to not be able to reach something, they're going to get up on the mid rail and they're going to potentially fall. So, if you double these systems up, then you're certainly getting a higher level of protection.
Yes. Speaking of scissor lifts, they put guardrails in there and they have a mid rail.
Mhm.
What does every employee do with the mid rail of a scissors lift?
I stand on it.
Stand on it.
It gives me a little more reach.
OSHA allows you to modify your guardrails. They don't have to have a top rail and a mid rail. They have to have a top rail, but you can, instead of having a mid rail, you can have vertical members.
Yes,
Why not do that? How do
Absolutely.
you climb on a vertical member? You can't.
exactly.
Just common sense. We don't do it, which reminds me of a podcast I just heard. Elon Musk. He's
Oh, yeah.
now in my training. Now, what does Elon Musk have to do with fall protection? Absolutely nothing. He's too smart to get involved in our industry. All right. But he made a comment about engineers. To all you engineers out there, I apologize. And I love engineers. We can't do
Yeah.
fall protection without them.
Yeah.
But he made a comment about engineers. He says engineers will work on the same thing over and over again, improving it without ever asking, does this thing really work?
Yes,
All right.
I saw that.
All right. And that's what I think about fall protection.
Mm.
We're using belts and harnesses and lanyards and harnesses. If you look back over the last 50 years, It hasn't worked.
But we've made incredible progress technologically,
Yes.
but
Making
we
them-
haven't addressed the real issue.
That's right. Oh, so there's no question a self-retracting lifeline is better than a shock-absorbing lanyard. There's no question a harness is better than a belt. But the whole concept still revolves around relying on that worker to tie off to something, and we're still exposing them to a free fall, and we're still exposing them to impact forces, which, if you think about it, if you give an employee a respirator, what do you have to do before he can wear that respirator?
Well, you got a medical evaluation and fit test requirement.
Yes, a medical evaluation. What do you have to do before you give him a harness and a lanyard? You put a mirror underneath his nose and see if it fogs up.
Yeah.
All right. And you give him the harness.
Yeah.
You have no idea if he's got clogged arteries,
Some internal
problems.
issues.
Who 1,800 pounds of force. That came from the dog study in 1953. Who knows if that's safe?
But we're potentially going to blast this guy on the end of a lanyard.
Yes.
With that 1,800 pounds of force or more, depending on how long he free falls, because they don't always.
Because that's the way we've always done it. Makes it okay.
Wow, man.
Because that goes back to the fact, I mean, either employers or employees, they don't think they're going to fall.
That's right.
And that's what I've been saying in a lot of trainings lately. Like, you guys have to, the equipment that you're wearing, is it the right for your application? Well, my employer gave it to me. That doesn't matter. They're doing their best, and hopefully they're giving you the right equipment. You've got to challenge that. You've got to look at the manual. You've got to ask questions to make sure. Because at the end of the day, it's you walking away. We'd all feel terrible anytime somebody gets hurt. You told us this story this morning about a fatality, or I guess that was you, Doug. That's terrible, and we'd feel terrible. But for how long? A day or two until we hear about something else that happened in the world. So employees challenging the fact of the equipment that they're wearing, is it the right equipment for them? And then rescue plan. How are you going to rescue me if and when I did take a fall?
Which is why I'm a big fan of passive, because you don't need a rescue
That's
plan.
exactly right. Yep.
This is really interesting to me because doing a lot of training, as you both do, we do a lot of training, but I see employees. Respirators are an example, fall protection example, eye protect, you name it, anything that a PPE type of application doesn't get a lot of respect. They don't treat it particularly well. I see it laying on the floor. I see it laying on the workbench, collecting dust and shit, getting greasy and stuff. And this is a piece of equipment that is potentially going to save your life. And we treat it like an old pair of gloves or something. Actually, I take better care of an old pair of leather gloves.
Those fingers hurt.
Yeah,
right?
man. But, it blows my mind. And I look at them and I think, this isn't a rental car, right? I mean, we used to all get a big kick out of abusing the rental car when we were young and had the ability to rent a car,
I never did that.
No, none of us. Well, maybe I just wasn't a participant. But we don't have a lot of respect for this equipment. We don't care for it to the extent that we should, perhaps. Maybe that is an attitude that's acquired from the employer, perhaps. Maybe that's something that's just part of the company culture. But if it's going to save your life, potentially, I would invest some time and effort into it.
I think it goes back to the fact I'm not going to fall. So why do I need to take care of it?
Maybe so, man.
Yeah.
Take care of it as if it's going to save your life someday, because it could save your life someday.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, your point about it, you see it being in bad condition, not taken care of, that reflects what you're saying, that they don't think it's ever going to be
necessary. That's a great.
Because I'm not going to fall.
Yeah.
But somebody's doing it.
Yeah.
Somebody's falling every year.
Absolutely.
And I've been doing these classes for years, and I always focused on fatalities. Then I saw a graph just a year ago, and I added this into my training. It's a number of injuries. I mean, it's in like 50,000 a year.
Yeah. And these are like
Injuries,
serious injuries.
Serious
typically.
injuries.
I mean, potentially life-changing injuries.
They're all from falls.
Yeah. 50,000
Wow.
injuries a year. Average. That's average. But I mean, the graph's staggering. And you look at falls, it's 500 a year. That's 10 times. I mean, just think of how many people are affected by this.
Yeah.
I did a class in Kansas City toward the end of the year in January. I can't remember. I'm too old. But I'm doing a class for the sheet metal workers down in Kansas City. Guy's late for my class. He's coming in a wheelchair. And I didn't say anything. He came in late. I was going to scold him for being late. I'm only teasing. But I went up to him and I said, "What happened?" He said, "I fell off a ladder." And then he showed me the video.
They had some security video of it or something.
Yeah. And I asked him if I could use it in my class, and he said yes. He said it'll keep somebody else from falling off a ladder, and it's troubling to watch. Climbed up to the very top, and then the ladder just slid down.
Extension ladder,
Yep,
just
extension ladder, and it takes your breath away.
Yeah,
I mean,
man.
you talk about how we get immune to this, but I don't think we really do. I don't. That's why I'm still in the business. I mean,
it still affects me too.
yeah.
I mean, you have to kind of develop a thick skin on the exterior.
Yes,
but on the inside, you're still sick.
it hurts.
It does.
And that's why, we've got to get rid of ladders, and we got to move to passive fall protection, and we got to do the first thing on the hierarchy of fall protection that nobody does, which is eliminate the hazard.
Agreed. Man, we just spent weeks talking about this with some clients, the fact that this hierarchy of control and the fact that we are so quick just to jump right to PPE of some sort. It's just easy. It's common. It seems like it's appropriate because we don't give a lot of thought or put a lot of energy into elimination of the hazards.
That's right.
And it's costly sometimes.
It's costly. And I think part of the problem is in the industry, fall protection is kind of an opaque type subject. So let's just get a fall protection guy to fix it. Well, you bring a fall protection guy in, he's going to fix it with PPE because that's how they're trained to fix the problem. And I'm just saying that's not the right fix. And you take the leading causes of death. Number one is falls off of ladders. Get rid of them. Falls off of flat roofs is number 4. Now think about that. The 4th leading cause of death is falling off a flat roof. How in the hell do you fall off a flat roof? Parapet walls, mandatory, or guardrails, mandatory. There's a Deuteronomy in the Old Testament of the Bible talks about if you have your neighbor helping you on your roof, make sure you have a parapet wall to protect them. Now that was written 3,000 years ago. How far have we come along with that parapet wall? Not well at all.
Not very well. They're not very attractive.
Yeah, don't get me started on that.
You put guardrails around it, and it ruins the swing fay or whatever, man.
It goes back to the fact that I'm not going to fall. I've been on hundreds of roofs over the years. Every time I go up with a maintenance guy or a safety guy, first thing they do is go right towards the edge, and I'm like, "Get away! This can't happen."
Well, it's like
right
a magnet.
Now.
It's a magnet to man.
It's human nature. I'm not going to fall. It
and
just blows my mind.
Let's see what's on the ground. It's just
I gotta go and look at my car, man.
And they're all like, "Oh, you're just being worried," and I'm walking like a penguin because it's slick, whatever. And human nature is, I got to go look over the edge.
I can remember pulling into a grain facility one time to do an inspection and looking up, and there was some kid sitting on a concrete elevator with his feet hanging off the edge, eating his lunch.
I saw the same thing.
I just like, we got a little work to do here, To
do an audit on a roof, and it was twice. I said, "Hey, when I pulled up, one of your employees was dangling his feet over the side. Wow, fix that." We go up there. Now there's a subcontractor on another parapet wall eating lunch, and he screamed at him. I don't know if it did any good, but
scared him and he fell off the man. That was always my fear.
Yeah.
I'd holler at them and they'd fall.
Yeah,
and I'd really feel bad. But you're right. I mean, this is absolutely right that until that solution is commonplace, though, until we require parapets or we require guardrails, we're going to still have these problems.
That's right.
It's not going to go away.
And it didn't need to be an OSHA requirement. This could have been a building code
Absolutely.
requirement. It could have been done 80 years ago, 100 years ago. And I remember giving a talk to architects. I did a class, and there's a bunch of architects. And I said, "We need parapet walls on the roof." And one of them said, "Where's the rain going to go?" Like, that's his defense. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm not the architect, buddy. You are. You can't figure out how to divert the rain somewhere.
You can run water off there. And
it's like residential roofing. You've all seen it. Nobody uses fall protection. Their fall protection is that little foam pad. The best fall protection solution would be to net around that house. And it could be a 2-stage thing. And this is my new campaign now.
Okay.
Let the big companies, the J.E. Dunns and the Kiewits and all these big contractors, they could go set the net up in 6 hours. And then let these individual companies that do roofing go up on that roof with absolutely no fall protection because they don't need it. Because if they slide down that roof now, if they're falling into a safety net, it's going to catch them.
Yeah.
But as long as we let these little mom and pop people take control of the whole thing, it's never going to happen.
And so is that driven by then the home builder? Is that the requirement?
it'd be driven, really what should happen, it should be driven by the insurance company. The insurance company never should have been allowed to just cut the check to the homeowner. The
Gotcha.
insurance company should be responsible for the replacement of that roof. Now they've got liability. All right. And then if they had liability, if somebody fell off the roof, I think we'd see a change in how roofs are done.
Oh, that's very interesting. I love that. I was going to ask you about the future of this whole concept, these ideas. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's one. I mean, so parapet walls on a roof,
Guardrails, permanent,
and roof access, eliminate the ladders, and do stairs.
Are the exterior access?
Yes.
Okay.
And scaffolding. Third leading cause of death is falls off scaffold. Well, most of the falls occur when they're climbing the outside of the scaffold, because OSHA was kind of forced into allowing them to free climb for the first 24 feet, because the argument was climbing a scaffold is no different than a fixed ladder, and your trigger level is 24 feet on a fixed ladder, so we can climb rebar or scaffolding 24 feet. Get rid of that stupid rule. And require them to have stairs on every scaffold that has to go more than one elevation. Stairs going up to the sides of roof.
Yeah, those stair towers on system scaffold are really nice.
Yes, they are.
Carry all the stuff up you want, no problem.
Yes.
Genius, Damon.
Yeah.
And it's so simple. And just like, I never thought of that scissor lift thing, the vertical. I'm like, just thinking outside the box.
So yeah,
when do you have time to think?
Driving in cars. Except now I'm listening to podcasts.
Now you're listening to podcasts.
So
now you're on podcasts.
My thinking switches. It's all right. I'm on the podcast.
Yeah.
Now I don't think anymore.
You don't have to think at all.
No, I just talk.
Oh, those are really interesting, man. So how do we do this? I mean, I'm up there pushing for elimination, for the controls that don't require employee involvement, but this is a big hill to climb, and
I know, and I don't, and this is one of my goals. It's like I'm going to be in the end of the career either because I can't do it, or people are going to say, "Hey, we don't want you anymore." So, but parapet walls, and then I found out one of the biggest obstacles of parapet walls are firefighters.
They don't like them.
They don't like them. Makes it more difficult for them to get on the roof. And I'm thinking, let's count how many firefighters fall to their death versus how many construction guys fall to their death. I think you got to look at which one has got the greatest risk. I'm sorry, but we can come up with some modification for the firefighters to get up there. But that's when I first approached this. I had a company say, "You're never going to get that passed because firefighters don't like parapet walls."
I've never even thought of that.
All right, so that was an issue. But the scissor lifts, vertical rails, simple fix, still have something in there for restraint, but you probably won't need the restraint anymore because they can't climb up on that mid rail or the top rail. And, and if they can't get on the mid rail, they can't get to the top rail.
It's like the ladders with the platforms. They had your top cap. They eliminated that first one down. Who's going to make that, skip one? There's no way anybody,
24-inch jump.
Unless you're a 20-year-old, like walking, working surface. That was, when was that put into effect? January 17th, 2017.
Yes, sir.
How many roofs have either fall arrest equipment or parapet walls that are tall enough or guardrails?
Few.
Less than 5%. I mean, that's just kind of, and that's an OSHA regulation. That still blows my mind that people haven't done more.
Yeah.
Hats off to those that have. And we're seeing more and more become compliant, and it's all about that maintenance guy that gets up there that is either distracted by what he's got to do up there. He's distracted with his personal life and his phone, or he doesn't think he's going to fall.
Yeah. There's a lot of things.
So putting up something passive that he doesn't have to do anything.
They shouldn't have to worry about falling off the edge of the roof.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If that parapet wall was there, there's no worry. And that, speaking of guardrails, because I think this is important. I went to a international fall protection symposium. You probably heard of it. They do it every year after the safety congress. It's usually a big waste of time. It's people like me talking to Jeff. We're having a competition. Who knows more? So it's just a waste of time. And we don't listen to each other. We just talk past each other. But one guy gave a presentation on guardrail height about 5 or 6 years ago.
About that 42-inch number.
Yeah. At the original guardrail height, this little trivia, anybody know what the original one was pre-OSHA? It was 36 inches.
36.
It was a building code standard. OSHA came along in 70 and said, well, 36 isn't high enough, and they raised it to 42. Well, this guy did a study and said 42 inches is great if you're 6'4" or shorter. If you're taller than 6'4", your center of gravity is above the top rail. And if you lean back against the top rail, you're going over the top.
Yep.
He said they should be 48 inches.
Mhm.
And so that's what I'm urging. And I'm talking to these people that make these portable guardrails. I'm not aware of any one of them yet that offers it as a 48-inch guardrail. We're
As
all
an
still
option.
at 42.
Mhm. I got to be honest with you, man. Heights scare the crap out of me.
Me too.
And 42-inch guardrails do not give me any comfort.
No,
And I'm only 6'2", but I lean up against it and I feel like I'm going over.
exactly.
I do not like 42. And
48, it doesn't hurt to go higher.
it's
right?
even, it doesn't hurt to go higher.
Yep.
And even on stairs, like stair platforms, I go to the grain elevators all the time, ethanol plants. They got these 12-story stair towers and the handrail is 30 inches. Hell no.
Yes.
That doesn't stop me from,
And
I can't even walk up them.
Or one of my favorites, if you go to a place run by MSHA, they don't really have any guardrail height per se. So I've gone into those plants where there's still the old 36. Now, if you want to get scared, walk on a platform where you got a guardrail that's only 36 inches high and it meets all the standards.
Yeah, freaks you out.
Yeah.
I don't love that at all. So you're afraid of heights?
Yeah.
Are you?
Well, look, after you jump enough times, you should be afraid of heights.
I'm terrified of heights.
I respect heights.
Yes. And I know we were down at the zoo and you were going to climb up that ladder that went all the way to the top of the dome. And I was like, oh, hell no.
I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of falling.
Yes.
But it'll never happen to you, right? You'll never
Respect.
fall.
Oh, no. I'm the one pulling people back from the edge.
So in the meantime, while we were working on these corrections that I agree with you wholeheartedly, and thank you for having the courage to say all that, it seems a little bit odd that it comes from a fall protection guy. But you know the reality of this. You know the truth about the statistics.
Yes.
We're just observing the statistics and making evaluations based on that. What do we do in the meantime to improve not only compliance with use? Is there a way, I mean, dealing with this human behavioral aspect, is there a way to improve compliance? Is there a way to make that fall distance calculation easier? I mean, what do we do? What can we offer?
I think until we do the right thing, we need to have competent people in fall protection, and they have to have complete control over the equipment that's being used.
Okay.
And I think the authorized user, which is a term used for the guys wearing the stuff, they should know nothing more than how to inspect their harness and how to inspect their lanyard, period. You know,
That's all they need to know.
That's all they need to know.
And the competent person makes all the other decisions.
Absolutely right.
That's all done for them.
Yes. So, you know, if you look at the OSHA standard, there's a list of about 8 different things that you're supposed to train on the authorized user: free fall distance, total fall distance. Both numbers are stupid. The real number you need to be concerned with is clearance. And they don't even require you to teach clearance, just free fall distance and total fall. So there's just so much misinformation out there. And then there's too many experts in fall protection out there. But you need to have a competent people be responsible for the whole program. They issue the harness, they issue the lanyard, they show them where the anchor point is, and don't let them make any decisions. Now your only thing is the authorized user has to know how to inspect it, and he knows that if he doesn't wear it, he gets fired, which is another problem we're having now. Nobody wants to fire anybody.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
Right.
And so it's going to get worse, not better.
So there's absolutely no consequence to not following rules because nobody has the stones to fire somebody.
That's exactly right.
It's few and far between, but my first stand down last week, I won't name the company, they know who they are. But they were, you know, hats off to everybody for all this stuff. They have a great culture, and I've seen that grow over the years. And then they said, after we pat you on the back, this is what happened last week and why. And it wasn't, one was a fall. It was something that they didn't do. And they said, we care about you so much that we're going to let you go. And then like the other one, some people got in a fight on the job site and, you know, they had to deal with that, but it's easier said than done because you have good employees or you have just employees. You can't let them go. It's hard enough to get somebody to come to work.
Well, and the rest of that equation, I apologize for interrupting you. The rest of that equation is we know employees are going to make mistakes. Good employees make mistakes. Bad employees make mistakes. And to cut them loose because they made a mistake, even though that's our policy, is unfortunate.
That's powerful, though. I heard a Kiewit guy say that years ago. the guy worked there 30 plus years, and they, you know, tapped him on the shoulder because he was doing something wrong with one of their cardinal sins. Fall protection happened to be one of them. And I don't know, lockout, tag out, or what some of their other ones were, but they said, we care about you so much that you no longer have no warning. I mean, if that doesn't send shockwaves through your organization, I don't know what would.
I'm sure it does, but what is the response to that from the average employee? They fire the big boss. So now I got to be, you know, be more careful or be more safe. It's like screaming at somebody, you know, don't fall.
Yeah.
You know,
And I couldn't do it.
I agree that you have to have a discipline program to some degree. Insubordination or lying or some of those things. We can't have that. But I think context drives behavior, and people make mistakes because of the context we put them in sometimes, the pressure we put them under, the pace that we set for them. So it's complex. There's a lot to it.
That's why
No doubt.
the only solution is passive. Because
ultimately,
I couldn't fire somebody. I mean, and you know, you say you got to fire him to set an example, but at the same time, if he just forgets or slips his mind, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you fire him, it's going to happen again. You got to just get rid of the damn
If you got the guy that says, fuck you, I'm not wearing it. Well, then
it's obvious.
I'm sorry, we're parting company because this is a condition of employment.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
But the guy that makes a mistake and gets fired for it, it pains me.
Yep.
I get it. OSHA has forced people into that position too. I mean, OSHA expects you to discipline people
right
in this progressive disciplinary fashion that we've been preaching for years. And okay, I get it, but I'm not sure that's the solution either. Scaring people into compliance or something.
I don't think it works, but you got to do something.
You got to do something.
And particularly if it's somebody that's, you know, just defying you. I think that's where you can draw the line. If the guy defies you and doesn't do it and just doesn't, and he's not going to do it, and he's calling your bluff, you got to do it.
Right.
But
I would agree with that.
A good employee that, you know,
makes a mistake
and he's working hard and doing something and I didn't do that. That's why you got to take the risk away.
It's really
like
tough.
I said, when you hire these people, you didn't tell them in advance, oh, by the way, you're going to be wearing a full body harness and be subjected to 1,800 pounds of force. And hopefully you won't hang more than 20 minutes and we'll get you down. You'll be okay.
Right. As long as we're not at lunch.
That's right. That conversation never happened. So that's why we got to get rid of the risks. And I know it's tough. But at the same time, you know, you watch these guys fall off of ladders and they're crippled the rest of their life. I mean, and that costs the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, because you keep paying until they die.
Yeah.
You know, and that should be the incentive,
yes.
Not the fact you want to fire the guy or make him wear a harness.
Yeah.
You got to get rid of the hazards.
Yeah, totally agree. Fascinating. I am really on board with this stuff. I appreciate your saying that. It takes a lot of courage to have that level of candor. Thank you for that. It's really good. So
I've been accused of having too much candor.
I am totally on board, man. So if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to learn more, hear more, if they want to retain your services, how do they get a hold of you?
Just my website's probably the easiest, Damon Fall Protection. That's
Damon
easy.
Fall Protection. That is easy. DAMON.
Yep.
I love it. How do they get a hold of you, Jeff? They can get a hold of you through me because I refer you to all my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, our website, pmg-safety.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty easy.
Yeah.
And if they know how to get a hold of me, they can get a hold of you. We've been working together for a long time. It's awesome. This has been fascinating. I hope you guys will come back. There's more to tell.
That's a long drive.
It is a long drive, but I am going to pay for Broncos.
Whoa, okay. And I haven't had one in 20 years.
All you can eat. Yeah. All you can eat at Broncos. Okay. Fortunately, hopefully that's not too much, but that is the compensation. I don't know if I mentioned that before you drove.
Oh, you do at the end. Yeah, that's classic.
I always tell everyone at the end, obviously this is voluntary, but I'm happy to buy lunch. So.
Well, Jeff said that check wouldn't clear anyways.
Yeah, well, there is 50-50. It just depends on if I've been paid. So my guys, I know I use a lot of subcontractors, and they're all like, "Hey, man, any word on that job I did for you 6 months ago?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll have to check and see if I've gotten payment for that." It's not usually that bad, but Kenneth might argue with me on that one. So
we're at the bottom of the food chain,
and so am I.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm the last one paid generally.
That's right.
So that's why my subcontractors are late to get paid. This has been fantastic, and I hope we can do it again at some point. This information is incredibly valuable. I love the concepts that you're promoting, passive protections and controls over active, good day versus bad day. If I'm having a bad day and I didn't put my equipment on correctly, something bad is going to happen to me. So
Yep.
I love that concept. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you for listening. Say thank you to a mother and your mother or some other mother. And we will talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.